Do you ever have one of those projects that you were just so excited for? You know, the one that you spent all that extra time making sure every detail, every measurement, every little thing that you could think of was going to be just perfect? Then the day the build comes and it's beautiful outside, all your lumber is not free, all your cuts and your glue ups are going amazing. You get to the last part of your build and you take a step back to admire your beautiful work. Yeah, this is not one of those projects. So for today's build, I decided to challenge my ability just a little bit with a tool that I'm not as familiar with, a lathe. And to make this challenge just a little bit harder, I decided to make a 12-inch segmented bowl out of 3 different types of wood. And the wood that I decided to use was walnut, mahogany, and maple. I wanted the design of this bowl to appear as though all the colors were spiraling towards the center. To achieve this design, I made wooden rings, decreasing in size, following a pattern of the 3 different types of wood. Each ring consists of 12 pieces cut to size in order to achieve that bowl-like shape. For the first steps of making each wooden ring, we have to cut each type of wood to a certain width. Once all of our pieces have been cut, we move on to setting our angle to our segmented pieces. Each wooden ring is going to consist of 12 different pieces. The angle on those pieces is going to be 75 degrees.
Yeah, I'll come over here, hear it? I'll show you. Gotta be precise.
So whenever I'm making angled cuts, I like to listen to the saw blade.
Nope.
We're good. I set my angle on my angle finder and I drag it across the blade. Sometimes you can hear it in the front end of the blade, sometimes you can hear it in the back end. Anytime that you do hear something, that means your angle is not correct. If it drags at all on that saw blade, that means the angle is off. Once the angle's been set, we're gonna move on to cutting out 4 identical pieces from each type of wood to get our first wooden ring. Once all the pieces have been cut for our first ring, we're gonna move on to cutting out pieces for our second ring, and our third, and our fourth, and so on and so forth, all in decreasing size to get our bowl-like shape. Taking all the pieces that I just cut over to the glue-up table, we move on to gluing all these segmented rings together. To make each ring, I repeated the pattern of each type of wood in groups of 3. Maple, walnut, mahogany. Maple, walnut, mahogany. And I use this pattern on all the different size rings. To make each ring, I placed the pieces in the desired pattern on a piece of tape. I then added glue and rolled them up to finish the ring off. And then I repeated this process on all the different size rings until I got to the smallest size ring. So the tape worked on all the bigger rings, but it didn't really work out on the smaller rings. So when I got to the smaller rings, I had to find a different way to clamp those together. I ended up using a hose clamp that was big enough to fit around the smallest ring. This is a great example of why it's so hard to throw things out sometimes. Because this hose clamp was for some other project so long ago, but I randomly kept it and it came in handy today. The longer I've been woodworking, the more I find myself using my tools in ways that are just not exactly how it's meant to be used. But sometimes it ends up working out. Once all the rings have been dry, I brought them over to my drum sander to ensure that they had a flat and uniform surface. For those of you that have been on my channel before, you know how awesome I think sanding is. This tool definitely makes sanding a lot less painful. With each ring sanded to a uniform thickness, we move on to the final glue up of this bowl. So before I lather up each of these rings with glue, I'm gonna do a quick dry fit to make sure the pattern is exactly how I want it. So I don't have a picture to reference for this bowl. It's all kind of just gonna be me winging it. So I'm just gonna kind of eyeball everything and make sure it looks pretty good before I glue it all together. In order to glue the bowl together, I had to add a piece of plywood to the top and the bottom so that I had a surface for the clamp to actually grab onto. Obviously a bowl has an empty inside, so you can't really clamp to the inside of a bowl. You want to make sure that each ring is as centered as possible, and this is going to help ensure that you have as little of a wobble as possible when you put it on the lathe. Which could be part of the reason why this project was a disaster, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Now we get into the fun stuff. So to give you the cliff notes of my experience using a wood lathe, I've really only made a handful of things over the years. I made a pool cue in high school, I've made 2 or 3 bowls, and a coffee mug. So that's pretty much the extent of my wood lathe experience.
I'm so nervous.
I was gifted this lathe a few years back, and it's really just been collecting dust in a corner
I'm trying
of
to
the shop.
adjust things, but like I said, I've never used this lathe.
Then one day, the idea of this bowl just kind of popped into my head, and I figured it was a perfect excuse to dust that lathe off and try it out. So with that in mind, most of the wood lathes that I've used in the past have been more on the heavy-duty side. They're more industrial, you know, meant to be turning big monster pieces of wood. And right off the bat, I was able to spot an issue.
It's a little out of whack, but
The bowl was a little bit offset, so it had a bit of a wobble to it.
Here we go.
And at this point in the project, I assumed that it was my glue up that caused that wobble. The mounting plate that you screw onto the spindle of the lathe, unfortunately, was offset just a little bit, and that's what caused the wobble. So what did I do? I tried it anyway.
let's go to the store and get a shield.
Today, I am reminded of how messy wood turning actually is. With the face shield acquired, we're ready to get right back to it. As I'm removing more and more of this bowl, the wobble is becoming more and more apparent. So I figured it'd be the perfect time to crank up the speed.
I think I'm gonna make it spin faster. We're gonna change the gears on this bad boy. So I moved one set. We'll see what it does. It's gonna go a little faster now. Here we go. Stay together, baby. Oh, hooked it right there. You see that? I gotta get in here and get the bottom so far in there.
Once the bowl was down to a shape that I liked, I moved on to sanding. I started off at 36 grit, and I made my way all the way up to 220.
How you gonna do the inside?
You know, we're gonna get there. That's how you do the inside, Nick. Flatten out the top. I don't know. Oh man, I broke my helmet. I don't know how people that are really good at wood turning do this. This is a lot of dust. All right, let's see how she holds up a little.
With the outside to my liking, we're going to move on to carving out the inside. Turning the inside of a bowl does pose its own challenges, but at the end of the day, it's pretty much the same as carving the outside of a bowl. Right as I was getting into my groove and I was almost finished carving out the inside of this bowl, I made it all the way to the last ring, so I needed to adjust my tool rest to reach that last little bit, and wouldn't you know it, I sheared off my bolt.
We have one more layer. That's it.
So what do you think I did? If you answered that I kept going, then give this video a like, because you are correct. While I was sanding, I noticed some pretty deep and heavy marks that just weren't coming out with the normal process of sanding.
We're gonna try something.
I felt the best way to remove those marks and nicks was to bring out the heavy artillery.
This may or may not make it into the video. I don't know.
At this point in the process, I was pretty much open to trying anything.
I don't know what's gonna happen.
For the finish of this piece, I decided to use Danish oil. Luckily for me, I had a bottle sitting in my cabinet that would work perfect.
It's like a 100-year-old bottle. Did you get that cool color change?
With my vintage
Nice
Danish
and
oil applied, it was time to
straight.
remove this bowl from the lathe. Removing the bowl from the lathe is
Maybe
pretty
not.
self-explanatory.
We're just gonna cut it.
You just kind of cut it off. I tried to carve a straight line so I had something to follow while I was cutting it off,
Whoa, hold on.
but that really didn't work out either.
Forgot to tighten it down. So this is probably the first and last time we will use this lathe. Now I got a straight line there, so now I know it's not even straight. We're just gonna cut it off, Nick. He's calling me. Oh, hi, how's it going? We're hanging in there, you know? That's right, that's right.
And to add to today's setbacks, I could not get my phone to stop ringing.
Okay, so
I went into this project, guns a-blazing, ready to go, thinking I had everything figured out. But at the end of the day, sometimes things just don't work out.
I tried, okay? I tried. So I'm just gonna put some finish on there, we're gonna clean it up, and that's a bowl.
The key takeaways from today's build are: wood turning is hard, experimentation and practice are key to improving your skills,
All right,
and you
whatevs.
can make a pretty decent bowl even on a cheap lathe. If you enjoyed today's video, you might like the one that's linked on screen. And as always, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.